New York City today, right? It's this undeniable global capital, a real powerhouse.
Absolutely. Culture, finance, innovation,
Yeah.
it's all there.
You see it everywhere. Home to billionaires, trend setting, this incredible mix of cultures, just buzzing.
It really is. But the question is, how did it become this?
Exactly. How did this extraordinary place actually, get here?
Well, that's our mission today. We're doing a deep dive, not just rattling off dates.
Right.
We want to uncover the really surprising stuff, the pivotal moments that shaped it. We've gone through a stack of sources for you, including A Brief History of New York by Dr. Afisavad Chayapolfat Sirvanhanawaravachara.
Quite a name there.
It is. But the goal is to understand why it all matters uniquely for New York.
So think of this as your shortcut. Yeah, your guide to understanding why New York is the way it is. We'll peel back the layers.
Exactly.
We want you to get those aha moments, connect the dots, and remember some of these, well, fascinating details.
Okay, so let's start way back. Before the Europeans, the land's original inhabitants.
It's the very beginning.
Indigenous peoples settled here thousands of years ago. We're talking the mid to late Holocene era. So maybe 7,000 BC to around 2950 BC.
Wow, that's deep history.
It is. We know Algonquin descendants were on Long Island at least 5,000 years ago.
Okay.
And then later, around 1000 AD, the Iroquois arrive. They form this powerful confederacy, the Five Nations.
The Mohawk, Oneida.
Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, yep. And you also had Mohicans and Minisink descendants in the Hudson Valley.
Right.
And what's really crucial, is that some of these groups fiercely resisted colonization. Later, some even sided with the British against the Americans.
So complex relationships from the start.
Very. And that resistance really shaped the early colonial dynamic.
Yeah.
Strong anti-American feelings in some quarters persisted.
Okay, so that's the foundation. Then the Europeans arrive. Columbus, 1492. Everyone knows that date.
Right, but the first European to really explore New York formally, that was Henry Hudson in 1609.
An Englishman working for the Dutch.
Exactly. Employed by the Dutch East India Company. He wasn't looking for New York, though. He was searching for a route to Asia.
The classic quest.
He sails up the river, claims the area for the Dutch New Netherland. He charted Long Island, the Bronx, Harlem River, New Jersey. I thought they were islands at first.
Huh. Easy mistake to make, maybe.
Well, the waterways are complex. So the Dutch West India Company jumps on this. They establish New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island in 1624.
Okay, the Dutch era begins.
And what's fascinating here is the Dutch tolerance for religion, ethnicities. It was quite progressive for its time.
That feels important for New York's later identity, right? The whole melting pot idea.
Absolutely. It arguably laid that groundwork very early on, attracted diverse people. But there was a darker side, too.
Which was?
The company's trade monopolies. Very restrictive. And significantly, they introduced slavery to America in 1626.
Right. A crucial and grim part of the story.
Definitely.
And the Dutch West India Company, they were really pushing for growth, weren't they? Trying hard to get people there.
Oh, yeah. They had these rules. Like, landowners had to settle at least 50 people within 4 years.
50 people? That's a lot.
And if you were a farm owner and brought in 60 settlers, you got a 14-year free period.
Hmm.
Real incentives.
Trying to build that critical mass.
Exactly. And it's funny, the few 17th century buildings left from that time,
Yeah.
contemporaries thought they were palatial.
Really? Palatial? Tells you something about the standards then.
Or maybe just the aspiration. But it wasn't all smooth sailing, far from it.
No. What kind of problems?
Well, constant tension, those costly fees, the monopolies.
Yeah.
People weren't happy. And there was actual violence.
Like what?
Records show killings, like Jerry Horlitz in 1640, Gabriel Bach's in 1641, early conflicts hinting at that competitive, sometimes brutal edge. And then an Anglo-Dutch war starts in 1665. That really ramps up English ambitions to take over.
And they do take over. 1664, England's King Charles II just grants the land to his brother.
The Duke of York? Yep. Poor Peter Stuyvesant, the Director General, he had to surrender New Amsterdam.
Tough guy, Stuyvesant, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Peg leg and all. But he couldn't hold out, and that's when it's renamed New York.
But wait, there's that twist, right?
Yeah.
The Dutch get it back.
Briefly. Yeah, it's a great little detail. For about 16 months, 1673-74, during another European war.
Just 16 months.
Then it flips back to English control for good. But that back and forth really shows how contested this place was. A dynamic hub right from the start.
Yeah, that early tug of war says a lot.
It does. And despite the Dutch ambition, for a great seaport, New Amsterdam was only, quote, modestly prosperous.
Really? Why is that?
They struggled. Had a surfeit of planters, meaning too many people wanting land grants, not enough actual farmers maybe, and just an underwhelming population overall, not dense enough.
Okay.
And the easy money was in things like whale oil. So merchants were drawn away by quick profits instead of building like long-term trade infrastructure.
Interesting. The lure of the quick buck, even then.
Always a factor.
But even with those struggles, the diversity was already there, wasn't it, in colonial New York?
Absolutely striking. You had groups like the Grisons from Switzerland,
Yeah.
Jansenists from France.
Forming this compact little foreign community.
Exactly. Amidst a vast world, as one source put it, that diverse seed was planted very early.
And colonial New York itself was, well, vast, right? Covered a lot of ground.
Oh, yeah. Many of today's counties, New York, Kings, Queens, Richmond, Westchester. But when the British took over, maybe only 2,000 people lived there. Lots of empty space.
Still very much a frontier in many ways.
For sure. But settlers adapted. Huguenots from France settled Kingston in 1670. French Rights bought at Chateaucoq in 1677. Palatinians, German Lutherans settled further south.
So the expansion starts filling in those gaps.
Right, cementing its place.
And this expansion, this is what fuels New York City's rise as a commercial center.
Precisely. It became one of the first cities in North America to start the journey towards becoming a world-class, busy commercial city.
Built on those resources and that amazing harbor.
Playing a key role in North American and even world trade pretty quickly.
I love that 1770 description. Manhattan as a busy European-style commercial city. Waterfront aligned with ships, wharves, storehouses, taverns.
Paints a picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And crucially, it was not a pre-industrial city. Trade and commerce were king.
Yeah.
Manufacturing came later.
That was the engine.
And it drove incredible population growth. Just over 7,000 people in 1698.
Okay.
Jumps to about 20,000 by 1730.
Wow.
It briefly fell behind Philadelphia, but by 1760, New York was back on top in North America. That competitive drive, that ambition, it was baked in early.
Okay, so thriving commercial city, growing fast, but then the revolution looms.
Right. And by summer 1774, New York City is deep in protests. But it's complicated.
How so?
Well, many New Yorkers were British subjects. They were ambivalent. Saw rebellion as this radical move, potentially chaotic.
So divided loyalties within the city itself.
Deeply divided, which made its role in the war really complex.
And strategically, New York was huge for the British.
Undeniably, that massive harbor, one of the best in the world, and control of the Hudson River that could cut the colonies in two.
A vital artery.
Absolutely. So the British bring overwhelming force. Lord and Admiral Howe, 30 large ships, 40 frigates, a land army of 35,000 men.
They weren't messing around. They meant to crush this fast.
That was the plan.
So 1776, skirmishes, then the big one, the Battle of Brooklyn Heights in July.
Actually, late August, August 26th. General Howe takes a gamble, attacks the American right flank.
And it works.
Yeah, causes confusion, leads to defeat for the Americans, though General Sullivan makes this incredibly brave stand with 500 men as a rear guard. Buys some time.
A devastating loss, but shows that grit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then comes Washington's escape, night of August 27th.
The evacuation across the East River.
Miraculous, really. Covered by artillery fire, and crucially, a thick fog rolled in. He gets his troops out, avoids encirclement.
A brilliant, desperate move. Saved the army.
Absolutely saved the Continental Army. But Manhattan then falls completely to the British. The city's abandoned again in November. Huge loss of military stores, desperate infantry slaughtered. New York becomes a British stronghold.
Throughout the whole war, pretty much.
For the rest of the war.
So these events, they just changed everything. Forced the colonists' hand, martial law in the city.
Meant to inspire dread, yeah.
But here's the amazing irony, right? New York, despite being occupied, divided, it emerges as this catalyst of the nation's birth.
Yeah, the first capital.
And the first independent capital of the United States. Incredible turnaround, adversity forging something new.
It really is. And the decade after the war, surprisingly productive for New York.
So.
They managed to pay off war debts. Banks did well. That harbor just kept being an asset.
And the political scene.
Well, the Sons of Liberty, who were big during the Revolution, they kind of evolved into the Tammany Society.
Ah, Tammany Hall. Later famous or infamous.
Exactly. But early on, it was focused on practical stuff, helping working classes, African Americans, immigrants get a voice, get candidates elected.
Trying to level the playing field.
Yeah, they even took Latin lessons. Believed understanding the language of the elite would help them compete.
Latin lessons, that's dedication. Okay, let's move into the 19th century. A time of just massive change.
Monumental growth, yeah. After 1821, the city gets some self-government, though that changed later. But physically, it just explodes.
Right. Absorbing new areas, the Bronx in 1874.
Queens in 98, Staten Island in 97. It wasn't just lines on a map. The city was literally bursting.
And fueling that burst.
Immigration.
Massive waves. New York becomes the main gateway. Over 13 million newcomers came through.
13 million. Staggering.
Driven by troubles in Europe. Famines, revolutions, wars, plus better, faster ships, 1820s to 1870s especially.
And a lot from Ireland.
A majority, for the first time, from a single country, which sadly also sparked the first real waves of anti-immigrant feeling. Anti-Catholicism flared up.
That tension, welcoming newcomers, but also backlash, a recurring theme.
Became part of the city's fabric.
And all these people needed work. Enter industrialization, big time, especially in the 1840s. Factories popping up, flour, grain markets booming, copper, iron, brick, cement industries taking off.
So it's not just trade anymore.
No, by the 1860s, New York is the manufacturing center of the United States. Everything from soda water to locomotives.
Providing jobs?
Much-needed jobs. And fascinating detail. German became the common language in many trades. Shows the cultural impact.
Wow. But this rapid growth, the Gilded Age, it had a dark side.
The very dark side.
Yeah.
Severe social inequalities and problems. Huge wealth next to horrific poverty.
Unsanitary conditions, slums.
Overcrowded tenements, neglected street kids, often preyed upon, and brutal working conditions for scanty wages.
A city of stark contrasts.
Absolutely. Glittering surface, immense hardship underneath.
But people push back, right? The reform spirit emerges.
It does. You see Protestant upper-class women getting involved, trying to help kids. A teacher rescuing girls from brothels, turning them into secretaries.
Amazing story.
A wealthy widow organizing volunteers to patrol streets. Organized labor starts flexing its muscles, like the cigar makers.
And the settlement house movement?
Right. The first one on the Lower East Side in 1893, people trying to fix things from within, shows that capacity for self-correction.
So by the late 19th century, a transformed city.
Totally. The nation's biggest metropolis. 4 million people by 1890. Double Chicago or Philly.
And Henry James called it
A gilt monster, sordid and splendid, captures it perfectly. Titanic employments and aspirations, but also chaos, corrupts, and dangers. That paradox again.
Okay, into the 20th century, the progressive era, trying to apply science and reason to these problems.
Yeah, tackling things systematically. Bad housing conditions, infant mortality. They scrutinized the milk supply, advocated for real institutional change.
Using logic against huge social issues.
And a big piece was the child labor movement. The Child Labor Committee pushed hard for state laws, compulsory education.
Not just moral outrage, but strategy.
Exactly. Made a real difference in New York's progressive landscape. Then World War I. New York transforms again from city of inaction
to the busiest war-work city in the world, almost overnight.
Incredible mobilization,
Yeah.
resources, labor.
Buying Liberty bonds, rationing food, even preparing for attacks, huge parades, victory celebrations. The city really embodied the national effort.
But soon after, the Great Depression hits. Hard.
Profound impact. Unemployment was already rising before the '29 crash.
Right.
Then panic selling, bank runs. The worst economic downturn in the city's history.
You could see it on the streets.
Literally. Flower stalls turned to food banks. Gilded streets turning to shantytowns, Hoovervilles. Stark visual change.
Grim times. Yet somehow culture survived, even thrived.
Remarkably so. That New York audacity, magazines adapted. Broadway did this controversial show in warehouses in '34, pushing boundaries.
And the living newspaper.
Yeah, using theater to critique capitalism, actually drew people away from movies, back to live performance. Incredible resilience.
And remember, New York was now the global financial capital, the stock exchange, skyscraper building, continued Flatiron, Chrysler, Grand Central projects, bridges, tunnels.
Still growing physically, even then.
But the flip side, the Jazz Age excess gives way to Prohibition-era gangsterism. Ruthless.
Riots, robberies.
Child prostitution even is welfare agency struggle. Extreme contrasts again. Unchecked ambition breeding darkness.
Then World War II. Another massive mobilization.
Colossal role. Even though the U.S. was neutral at first, New York was very pro-Allied.
And the port. Just unbelievable numbers.
Handling 3,900 tons of wheeled military vehicles a day. 90,000 troops a month passing through. The logistical heart of the war effort.
Wow.
Industrially, too. New York produced more than half of the nation's industrial output during the war.
More than half.
Secured contracts worth over $38 billion. more than any other city worldwide. Sheer industrial might.
So after the war, a boom.
Big time. Population hits nearly 8 million. Economy is booming. And unlike Europe, the city itself wasn't bombed.
Spared the physical devastation.
Right. But new problems creep in.
Like what?
Skyrocketed rentals and costs, taxes up, public services strained, and that massive exodus begins.
People moving to the suburbs.
Working in middle class, yeah.
Yeah.
Threatening the tax base, school enrollment, setting the stage for struggles later on.
Okay, so mid-century also brings the civil rights movement into sharp focus.
Yeah, and that paradox, one source highlights, America being friendly to its foreign-born.
But hostile to its own native-born black citizens.
Exactly. Then 1954, Brown v. Board of Education declares separate but equal, unconstitutional. Breaks the back of Jim Crow.
And that had huge effects up north, too, not just the South.
Profound effects. New York was a key battleground.
Figures like John Jay, early on with anti-slavery.
Laying groundwork. And later, NAACP lawyers like John Kenney, Walter Jones, fighting to get black lawyers admitted to the city bar.
These legal battles in the nation's capital of finance and culture, they sent ripples everywhere.
Absolutely. But progress wasn't linear. The 1970s. That was a really tough decade for New York.
The civil dislocation period.
Yeah. Blackouts, subway chaos, crime soaring became known as the murder capital by 1980.
Parks neglected, libraries closing.
Education declining, and people left. An unprecedented 820,000 residents moved out. Alarming.
So efforts like urban renewal were tried, federally funded redevelopment.
Right. But sometimes it backfired, caused decline spirals, neglected communities, displaced people without good alternatives.
A hard lesson in urban planning.
Definitely. Thankfully, by the mid-'80s, the thinking shifted. Realizing that dismantling the city was, well, absurd, focus shifted back to communities.
And during this time, gentrification starts picking up steam. Complex issue.
Very complex. It brought an escalated class divide, no doubt. But also, falling crime rates, safer neighborhoods.
Those rundown neighborhoods becoming hipster havens.
Exactly. Renewal, but at a cost.
And that's the contradiction, isn't it? Investment, revitalization, great. But pushing out the cultural and social hosts.
The original communities. Displacement through rising rents, harassment, illegal eviction sometimes.
Yeah.
That constant struggle, progress versus preservation.
Always balancing those forces in New York.
Okay, let's bring it to the 21st century. And you can't start without 9/11.
No. Changed everything. The skyline, the sense of security.
Ushered in a new reality of terrorism. Destroyed the World Trade Center. Huge debate followed about rebuilding Ground Zero.
Culminating in the One World Trade Center, 1776 feet tall.
A powerful symbol of resilience.
And the city did rebound remarkably by the turn of the century. Nearly 10 million residents.
Brimming with confidence, financial power, cultural leadership again, and crime plummeted. Some areas became among the safest globally.
That resilience theme again, reinventing itself after crisis.
It's woven into the city's DNA. And technology changed things profoundly, too.
Smartphones, social media.
Widespread adoption from the early 2000s, blurring public and private life. Things caught on video could change reputations instantly.
And online communities merging into social networks, bringing people together, but maybe differently.
Reshaking interactions, for sure.
And today, still facing challenges. Housing affordability is huge.
Over half of renters were rent-burdened back in 2017. Still a major issue. Plus, urban-rural dynamics, youth violence, ongoing discussions.
But that diversity remains central. 37% foreign-born residents.
Still at the forefront globally. And that quest for diversity, equity, inclusion, it continues. It goes right back to the Dutch days, in a way.
It does, and through it all, that cultural capital status holds firm.
Unparalleled. Broadway, Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, the Met, MoMA. It's this incredible ecosystem built on immigration, ambition, artistic freedom.
A living testament to the city's soul.
Absolutely.
And you can taste that diversity, too. New York as a food capital.
Oh, definitely. The pizza, the bagels, the deli sandwiches, they all tell a story.
New York bagels, boiled, then baked, crispy outside, chewy inside, those schmears.
A legacy of Jewish delis, and the pizza thin crust, crispy, sold by the slice. Perfect city food.
Quick, democratic. And the delis, those huge sandwiches, corned beef, pastrami.
Nish's matzo ball soup. From Michelin stars to street carts, the food reflects the city's journey.
It really does.
So when you look back, it's this incredible journey from a small Dutch settlement in 1626 to this global giant, constant, Dreadful alteration, as one source put it.
3 different New Yorks almost, emerging from the past.
Each shaped by resilience, ambition, adaptation.
So what's the final thought for you, our listener? Maybe it's that relentless forward motion, that constant reinvention. One source described it almost like a crazy drunkard on a bender, fighting all against oneself.
A provocative image.
It is, but maybe it captures that push and pull, that cycle of creation, destruction, growth, displacement. It is New York.
Yeah, so reflect on that perpetual motion. What does it mean for the city's future? For any dynamic city's future?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions. Notice those layers of history all around you.